Hi everyone, and welcome to Bluebeam Revu. My name is Ari, and I'm a Bluebeam certified instructor with Digital Drafting Systems. Today, we're going to learn about the interface and navigation of Bluebeam Revu and how we can set up the interface of the program through profiles to be very efficient. Here we have a PDF open, and we're currently using the default profile. This is called the Review profile. And right now, this profile excels in giving us lots of viewing space for our PDF, for example. So here we can see our entire PDF. And we also have some side panels on the left side and a few important shortcuts for shapes and different markups on the right side, along with a few common measurements. Now, we can see this profile by going to click on the word review on the upper left side, and then mousing over profiles right here. You can see there's a check next to review, so this is the active profile. I can switch this to any other profile that I want to. I've made profiles for different training purposes. My own profile is right here. Let's look at the review advanced one. This one should look very similar to the Review Advanced profile right out of the box. And this profile minimizes our viewing space a little bit by placing some shortcuts at the top of the screen. However, on the left and the right side of the program, we now have our side panels split, so we can look at two side panels at once instead of just one on the left side. Now let's make a new profile from scratch. I typically use this one as a template. What we need to do is fix this one and add things like save as right here next to save. The edit toolbar is not turned on, so doing things like undo and redo, paste in place, they're not available, so we want to turn that on. We want to add the unflatten button and a few other buttons here. So let's get to that right now. To create a new profile, we're going to go back to the review dropdown, mouse over profiles, ensure that the profile that you want to copy the settings from into a new one is checked. So we have Review Advanced as the active profile. Once we click on Manage Profiles, we're going to see that active is also at the top here. Switching it here doesn't really make any difference. So if I switch the profile here, it's not necessarily going to make a copy of that profile. It must be active in the background prior to going into Manage Profiles. Now what I can do is immediately click on Add. I can give my profile a name. So I'm going to call it Training Profile, just like that. And I'm going to click OK. Before I do this, the screen is going to change significantly. And I want you all to notice what may happen to your navigation bar right down here. So you can see that my pages are labeled right here, along with several other buttons on this horizontal bar. So I'm going to click OK. After doing this, the program has now shifted a lot of buttons into key places, and you can see that my navigation bar is essentially cut in half horizontally. I don't see my page numbers, and I don't really see half of the buttons that we saw earlier. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to show you all how to fix this right now. What we need to do initially, of course, is to also begin customizing this profile. Before we do, let's just make sure that this is the active one. Review, profiles, and there it is. We have a check next to the current profile that we just created. That's awesome. And now to customize it, we're going to go to the Tools dropdown right here, and then mouse over Toolbars. The first thing that I recommend that your profile has is the status bar. This contains several buttons below the navigation bar that are really useful, like snapping to different vector data, snapping to your own markups, and even toggling on or off the Reuse Markup Tools option, which can save you a lot of time. Now, the next bar that we want to look at is the navigation bar. When I turned on the status bar, it did partially change. It is not necessarily cut in half now, but it's still missing a lot of buttons. So if I turn the bar off and then on, now it's all back to normal like we saw earlier. So we can see the pages and many of the other buttons are now available and nothing is cropped in half. Now we're going to move on. I'm going to recommend some toolbars that everybody should more than likely have turned on. For example, advanced text is quite useful. You can use that to underline text and to even select and edit text if you want to. Moving on, we can turn on document, which is very important. It's going to have a lot of different shortcuts there that we're going to be using. Edit, we were talking about that earlier. Now we have the undo, redo buttons, cut, copy, paste, and eventually paste in place, which we're going to be turning on very soon. We're going to skip a few here, turn on order. At this juncture, I recommend turning off rotation. There are two different ways to rotate in Bluebeam Revu, and this form of rotating involves rotating all pages all at once, kind of like rotating your own head 90 degrees. Instead, we're going to use rotate pages found in thumbnails to do our rotations for us, and we can choose which pages rotate And the analogy is like taking a piece of paper and rotating that 90 degrees instead of our head. Moving on, we're going to turn on Sketch. This is quite useful when it comes to measuring. And the last four are quite nice. We're just going to customize a little bit about what's inside of these toolbars. To do that, we're going to click on Customize. Before we do, let's take note of how our tools look at the top of the screen now. We essentially have two rows of different kinds of tools, and here's some new toolbars that we just added, and we're going to learn more about them and start reorganizing them in places that make sense. Let's customize our tools by clicking on the Tools dropdown, mousing over Toolbars, and at the bottom, we're going to click on Customize. Here, we're going to start on the right side. We're going to look at our toolbars and the items below that correspond with them. So if I switch to another toolbar, I can look at the items. I'm going to be careful not to click on the checkbox to the left because that turns them on or off at the top of our screen. In the advanced toolbar, I recommend the following. We can have erase content next to cut content, two very useful tools. We can also add unflatten next to flatten. To do that, now we need to look at the left side of the toolbar section where we have categories and commands. And these categories will then change the commands below them that correspond to their group. So we're going to go to the document category. We click on File, then click on Document, and then we can see different things that we're looking for. We're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we're going to find Unflatten right here. Then we're going to use this arrow between the items and the commands to move it on over, and then we're going to move it on up by using these blue arrows on the right side right here. So now we have flatten, unflatten, cut content, erase content, and we can leave the rest of these things here. However, the Format Painter is actually going to be located in our Edit toolbar, so we don't need to have a duplicate here. We have two options. We can turn it off, or we can delete it completely. Either way means that we don't see it at the top of the toolbar section, but it may reduce some space on the profile, so we're just going to delete it. Let's move on to advanced text. We can add select text here. It's going to be found in the select category. So then we click on the categories, select, select text, arrow, and then we move it up. And you can see this process. We're going to be repeating it throughout just to do some customizations that I recommend. Let's move on to document right here. We don't need flatten or erase content here because they're already found in the advanced toolbar. So we're just going to get rid of them. So I'll select this, delete, select that, and delete. And we're going to add the comparison and overlay tools here. We're going to go back to the document category. Compare documents is right here, and overlay pages is near the bottom. It's all in alphabetical order. Let's move on. We're going to go to the edit toolbar. We have almost everything that we need here except for paste in place. And we do have flatten here, but it is turned off by default. I can leave it like that or delete it. Either way is fine. Let's add paste in place. Paste in place is found in the edit category. Here we are. And paste in place. We'll add it to the right and move it right below paste. Perfect. We're almost done. We're going to go to File now and add Save As below File. You could also turn on Save All, but I typically like to save each of my files individually to make sure that I'm not accidentally saving a file that I've made too many irreversible changes to. So we're going to go back to Categories. The File category has Save As. We'll move it here and move it on up. Beautiful. We're now going to continue. Most of the other toolbars are in great shape. For example, Measure has everything turned on. We have navigation bars here. You guys want to make sure that Disable Line Weights is turned on in the navigation bar right. There were some bugs back in the day where this one was not necessarily turned on or just not there at all. So we can turn that on here. There's also other ways to turn them on that I'm going to show you guys right after this. Moving on, the shapes and sketch sections are excellent. The text section could include more markups, so we're going to use that to our advantage. And the separator isn't necessary to turn on, but it is nice to kind of separate and draw your attention to the text box and typewriter tools, which are very different from the other markup tools. We could even put callout with them. So that would make a lot of sense since they're similar tools, and we do typically create callouts pretty often in our workflows. So I'm now reorganized that from my workflow. I'm now going to go to the Zoom toolbar, and we can see that there's actually an extra measure tool here. This is already found in the measure toolbar, so we don't really need that. Select text is also here and could have been turned on, but we moved it next to edit text, which makes a little bit more sense. So we're just going to delete it from here. And that's it. Let's also delete measure tool. Perfect. And that is basically it for customization. There's obviously more customization that you guys can do, but this is what I recommend for now. We're going to click OK. The top of our screen is now a little bit different. We can see that we have all the things that we turned on, just like save as, paste in place, etc., etc. And the only issue that I have is at the top of my screen, I now see that there's an arrow facing down right here. If I click on this, there's a couple of tools that don't necessarily fit at the top of the screen. If I was to move even more tools up here, we could see that now there's multiple arrows because all of these tools, they just don't fit. So we're going to adjust this now. I'm going to be moving the purple tools to the second line where they already were. I'm going to move the orange ones next to them. These are sketch to scale tools going next to the relative measuring tools. And now you can see the top of my bar is much, much clearer. Just to make things even, I'm going to move this toolbar down here, and that's it. And you can see how I can just click and hold these white vertical dotted lines and move them. Here's another tip. If you want to make sure that you're maximizing all of the space that you have, you don't necessarily want gaps between your tools, right? So I'm making some artificially just to show you all that if you grab the last tool group, you can smush all the others to the left, just like that. And now I've guaranteed that there's no gaps. Just move your cursor a little bit to the right as you're holding. So click and hold and just move a little to the right and then let go. Beautiful. And now we've really optimized the tools at the top of our screen. There's other ways to add tools to our toolbars. We can click on one of the drop downs at the top of our screen. And when we mouse over them, we're going to see a pin icon to the right side of it. So we can put translate markups into one of our other bars, such as perhaps the navigation bar on the right side. And there it is. Now we have the shortcut right down there. This is also how I got the disable line weights one to show up. Sometimes it isn't there by default. So if you go to view, you can find disable line weights right here, and you can add it to one of your toolbars. Then we can look at our status bar. We can see that the word ready is displaying on the bottom left side. And this will change based on what tool you have selected. By default, when you open the program, the pan tool is being used. This is the hand tool right here. And to the right of it is the actual select tool. The benefit of the pan tool is that you can click with the left mouse button and pan around the screen just like this. Simultaneously, you can also click the middle mouse wheel down and do the exact same thing. You can even double click the middle mouse wheel wherever you're currently viewing, and this will fit the page exactly where it needs to be and zoom out to show you the entire page. Now, let's look at some other things that we can do. We can actually click on the select button right here. This now changes the text on the left side of our status bar. It now says select region containing markups. So this is now giving us instructions. And when we click on any markup, these instructions also change to suit that markup and to teach us more about how to use it, such as by using the highlight tool and now seeing that we can press enter to start a new segment, for example. Now, let's look at the right side of the status bar to the right of that text. We have show grid and snap to grid. Essentially, you can show this dotted grid line, and then as you zoom in, it gets more dense and more dense up to a certain threshold, and then less dense up to certain thresholds, as you can see. And then you can snap to the grid with different kinds of markups. The third option I recommend turning on and using most of the time, this is called snap to content. It allows you to use any markup tool and essentially snap to different kinds of vector data, data that came from smart programs such as Microsoft Word or CAD and BIM programs. If you now use the line tool or another equivalent tool and mouse over vector data, you'll see a little pick box now appears. This allows us to snap to different special parts of objects, such as the quadrants of a circle, the midpoint of a line, and you can see how the box goes from empty and then highlights itself when it's at a very specific snap. When it's empty, it's on a random or nearest portion of the line. Then we have endpoints, and of course we have the midpoint right here. And that's essentially how we can use snap to content to connect different objects to each other and markups to different objects that already exist. The same thing goes for snap to markup, the fourth option down here. However, when you're using a markup such as the line tool, now a guideline appears and it wants you to draw in relation to the edge or the center of a markup, as you can see here. This will not allow you to draw in between very easily, so I recommend only using snap to markup whenever you need it. The fifth one revolutionizes the way that we create markups in Bluebeam Revu. It's called Reuse Markup Tools, and it definitely should be on and is very useful. I leave it on basically forever. Without it turned on, if I was to use the line tool, then I would have to create one line and the tool would be deselected from my cursor. I'd have to go and click the line again and make another one. And to create 10 lines this way would be rather tedious, as you can see. Instead, I can use reuse markup tools, and now when I create a line, I can essentially continuously create lines indefinitely. And when I'm done, all I have to do is press the escape key. And now I've deselected the tool from the cursor when I'm ready, but I can continuously make as many as I need, just like that. Then with the select tool, the benefit of using the select tool is that yes, I can still pan around the screen with my middle mouse wheel and double click the middle mouse wheel for zoom extents, but I can now use the left mouse button instead of panning equivalently. I can just make a selection box. I can make basically a small box crossing over these lines like this. And as long as I cross over a portion of each line, they will be selected. That's because I started on the right side of the markups and then moved to the left. So when you start from the right, you're now using what's called a crossing selection. The opposite is true if you start on the left side. This is called a window selection. Now I'm just going to try and select the line in the middle while not fully selecting any of the other lines. Now I'm going to let go, and I only got the line in the middle because the other lines were not fully inside of the window or the selection box. I can show this now by selecting half of these, just like this. And there we are. I did not get the middle line or this one. I only got what was fully inside of the box. So from the left side is a window selection, and the right side is a crossing selection. So I typically start on the right side, make very small boxes around things just to quickly select them, and then I can just delete them all by pressing the delete key. It's a really nice, fast way of selecting multiple markups very quickly. And from there, the last button in the status bar is Synchronize Views. You can essentially have multiple views open, so I'm going to split my screen vertically. If you only have one file open, this creates a copy of the file that you're viewing at the same time. And Synchronize Views allows me to look at two of the same spot on each PDF. So if I go to page 2 on one of my other PDFs on the left side, then page 1 is still available on the right side. And I can essentially see older versions and newer versions side by side and try to compare manually what changed between them if I need to. Of course, I can also use the comparison and overlay tools that we just turned on earlier to do the same thing. And that's essentially the status bar. And there is a caveat to synchronize views. There's a little drop down. You can synchronize page or document. Synchronizing document means that no matter what page you switch to in both documents, you must look at the same page. So if you're going to page 3 or 4 on one of them, the other one will also switch to 3 or 4, depending on whatever you choose. Synchronizing individual pages allows me to look at different pages on different sides. So now I can look at my BCI diploma while looking at this floor plan here on the right side. And there are two separate pages. The diploma is actually page 5. You can see how that changes when I click inside of the window on the left side. And then if I click on the right side, now it says 3 of 7. So these are essentially different pages, and that's what synchronized page means, and why I typically use it over synchronized document. But synchronized document can be very useful for aligning your page numbers together when you're looking at two different things. The last thing we'll do before we finish off is we're going to be going to preferences to look at a few settings there that are going to help us succeed even more. We can click on the word review in the upper left side and then click on preferences. These are where the settings are for the program. We'll start in the general tab, and we're just going to be changing a few things in some of the tabs that I would recommend. For example, we can go to the document tab right here and change our maximum zoom from the default number to 12,800 maximum. If you type a larger number, such as 15,000, and then press enter, it'll default to the largest number that it's able to process. From here, we can go to navigation. You can change your sensitivity from 4 to either 3 or 2. This means that you'll use your mouse wheels to scroll forward or back a little bit more, but you can be more accurate as to what you're trying to zoom in on and not go too far in or too far out all at once. I prefer 2, but you guys can experiment with 3 or 2. Moving on, under grid and snap, you can change some settings such as your grid spacing settings here whenever you need to. And as long as snap to content is turned on, the other snapping options are on. Include ignore tiny line segments, which I like to turn off. I changed my sensitivity to 15, but you can experiment with that and see if it's selecting unnecessary things or not enough snaps on lines. And the snap color can definitely be changed from black, the default, to a color that contrasts with black pretty well. So this green works really well. Magenta is a great suggestion as well. And then from here, we also have settings for spelling. So if there's any words that are not automatically in Bluebeam's dictionary, then you can essentially use this custom word section and you can add them here. Don't have to go here and do it. You can actually just right click on a word and then add it to the dictionary, and it should basically pop up here automatically. So a word like submittals with an S, for example, is not in Bluebeam's dictionary here. Now let's move on. We're going to be going to tools. Here's where you can turn on some settings for auto sizing text boxes and call out markups if you wanted to. Reuse tools is also able to be toggled on or off here, but you can just do it down here in the status bar. And the measure section is pretty important. You can change your settings here. These measure settings are not necessarily for measuring tools. It's actually just for dynamic fill. So you can mimic the settings that I have here. I basically changed my DPI right here and the fill size, fill speed, and boundary size. Everything else I basically left the same. The only other major difference is momentarily hide markups, which you could leave on or turn off depending on if you want them to momentarily hide while using a fill or a boundary, for example. Then in the signature section, if you ever wanted to have your password timeout a little bit less often whenever you're digitally signing, you can change that timeout from 5 minutes to something a little bit larger. In the Studio section, if you ever wanted to change your display name in Bluebeam Studio, this is where you would do it. So just go to Servers and just make sure that you're signed in. You should automatically sign in if you're using Review 21 and you've activated your program, just like I have here in the upper right side. And then you can see your display name and you can change it at any time. The last few settings that I want to talk about are found under Advanced. Here, we can essentially check that our rendering engine is set to hardware. If it's set to software by default, that means that your computer probably has slightly lower than the recommended specifications, so you may want to be careful about that. And if you're dealing with really, really large files, instead of using the default setting for iterative draw, you can actually switch it to wait for completion. This allows you to open large files and only render and load whatever you're visually looking at on the screen and not the entire document all at once. So that can help when opening files and navigating and panning around files that have lots of heavy images and many, many, many sets of data on them that are really, really intense. Then the last thing that I'll talk about is the admin section, because here you can reset your program to default settings. You can back up the program if you need to. This will include your profiles and custom tools and the settings here in preferences. You may have noticed that these settings and preferences were set for the program, not for this profile. So they were already set, and I basically just talked about the differences between the default settings and my settings. So as you guys go along, you'll see that I have some differences in my settings than yours. And that's basically it. So when you're ready, you can just click OK. Your preferences are ready. And the last thing that we want to do to be safe is to go to the word review in the upper left, mouse over profiles for the last time. With a check next to our new profile that we created, we can click on Save Profile. This makes sure that all the changes we made are now saved. The profile saves itself to a default folder deep in our computer. If you want to control this, you can go back to Review, Profiles, and then Manage Profiles. And then you can select your profile and click on Export. This allows you to make a copy of it, and you can save that anywhere you'd like. So I'm going to save it in my Toolsets folder right here, and that's it. Now we're all backed up and we're ready to go, and we can travel to any other computer and bring our profile and our interface with us. We don't have to recreate it ever again. Thanks very much for watching our tutorial on setting up our interface in Bluebeam Revu with profiles. Once again, my name is Ari, and I'm with Digital Drafting Systems. Hope you have a great rest of your day.